Welcome to The Debate. Today we are digging into how adults actually take their very first steps in learning English. Specifically looking at the absolute ground floor, the A1 beginner level. You know, when you watch a skyscraper go up, for the first few months, you don't actually see a building.
Right, no, you just see a hole.
Exactly, just a massive hole in the ground filled with concrete and a rigid grid of steel rebar. It's highly compartmentalized, and honestly, it looks absolutely nothing like the gleaming, organic glass tower it's eventually going to become.
Yeah, it's just a grid. An inflexible, utilitarian cage of steel.
Exactly. It's a cage, but without that unyielding, perfectly measured grid buried deep in the dirt, the moment a strong wind blows, that beautiful glass tower shatters. And that fundamental tension brings us exactly to our focus today. We are analyzing the pedagogical framework of foundational A1 level English acquisition, using the introductory material from the widely used top-notch curriculum as our anchor.
Which covers the very first moments a non-native speaker begins to formally construct English. The stakes for a learner's confidence here are, frankly, incredibly high.
Precisely. And the central question we are exploring is this. Does the highly structured, compartmentalized conversation model approach, which strictly divides interactions into discrete modules, like introductions, greetings, and goodbyes, does that provide an essential, robust scaffolding for A1 English learners? Or does its heavy reliance on rigid formulas and repetition artificially constrain their natural communicative development?
It's a huge question.
It is. I'll be arguing that the highly structured formulaic scaffolding provided by this text is, in fact, the optimal engine for early language acquisition. By drastically reducing cognitive load and providing immediate, measurable functional utility, it gives the A1 learner exactly what they need to survive those crucial first encounters.
And I will be countering that. While the text certainly offers a safe starting point, its strict compartmentalization and its, heavy reliance on rote, listen, and repeat behavioral loops run the very real risk of creating robotic exchanges.
Robotic?
Yes, robotic. It prioritizes mimicking a script over fostering genuine communicative adaptability, which, can severely stunt a learner's ability to bend in the wind when real life doesn't follow the textbook.
Well, to really understand this top-notch material, we have to put ourselves in the mind of a true A1 English learner. This is an adult who possesses little to no functional capacity in the language yet. So we need to talk about what linguists call the affective filter.
Oh, right. The anxiety barrier.
Exactly. When an adult learns a new language, their ego is entirely on the line. They are suddenly reduced to the expressive capacity of an infant. The brain actually perceives this vulnerability as a social threat, which triggers the amygdala.
It's a literal fight or flight response.
Yes, cortisol floods the system, literally and chemically blocking the brain's ability to retrieve vocabulary or process new syntax. They are terrified of making a mistake. What they require above all else is absolute clarity and psychological safety.
And you see that safety net explicitly framed right at the top of the page in the curriculum.
Yes, you see the explicit communication goals checklist. Number 1, introduce yourself. Number 2, greet people. Number 3, say goodbye. By treating English not as this vast, mysterious ocean of expression, but as a series of highly achievable, fixed tasks, the text acts as a neurological soothing mechanism.
It breaks it down.
Right. It tells the learner you do not need to understand everything today. You just need to know how to say, "Nice to meet you too." Memorizing these fixed, highly predictable phrases provides a vital baseline.
Look, I understand the appeal of that psychological safety. Lowering cortisol is obviously important, but I believe language is inherently dynamic, even at the very first moments of the A1 level. And overscripting can be severely detrimental to a learner's long-term trajectory.
How so?
Well, if you look closely at this material, you see a reoccurring, heavily emphasized instruction, rhythm in intonation. Listen again and repeat, then practice the conversation model.
Which is the standard engine for foundational acquisition?
It is standard, sure, but we need to unpack the mechanics of what is actually happening in the brain there. Look at the core model. A. Hi, I'm Martin. B. Hi, Martin. I'm Ben. The text instructs learners to run this exact track. My argument is that this heavy emphasis on rehearsing fixed scripts treats early language learning more like, well, memorizing lines for a stage play than developing a generative, spontaneous cognitive skill.
It creates an illusion of competence. The learner can perfectly execute the Martin and Ben exchange in the safety of a classroom, but the moment a real-world interaction deviates even slightly from that highly specific script, the learner is completely left stranded.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. You see the instruction to listen again and repeat as treating the learner like an actor in a play. I see it as essential neurological conditioning. I come at it from a different way. If we look at the mechanics of this repetition, the text relies on a closed behavioral loop. A learner might perfectly mimic the rhythm and intonation of the phrase, "see you tomorrow." They can make it sound incredibly natural.
Right, which is the goal.
But without understanding the underlying grammatical flexibility, without knowing why the verb see is functioning the way it does, or that tomorrow can be swapped for later, they aren't truly communicating. They're just pressing play on a vocal recording they've stored in their head. Early language should focus on generating meaning, even if it's clumsy and grammatically flawed, rather than prioritizing the perfect intonation of a rigid phrase.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you are skipping a vital physiological step in language acquisition. Let me offer a different analogy. Learning A1 English is a lot like buying prefabricated IKEA furniture.
Okay, I'm listening.
When you need a chair, you don't need a degree in metallurgy to forge the screws, and you don't need to know how to chop down the tree to make the wood. You just need the pre-built pieces and the Allen wrench so you can snap them together and sit down. In English, grammar and syntax are the metallurgy. The rote phrases, "nice to meet you," "see you tomorrow," are the prefabricated pieces.
But eventually they have to learn how to build their own furniture, or they will only ever be able to sit in the exact chair the textbook provided.
Yes, eventually. But right now we are talking about day one. They need to sit down. And furthermore, you dismiss the rhythm and intonation drills as just pressing play on a vocal recording, but mastering the prosody, the music, the rhythm, the physical shape of the syllables in English is absolutely critical.
It is important, I'll grant you that.
English is a stress-timed language, which means we swallow certain vowels and punch others. If an A1 learner uses the right vocabulary, but the wrong prosody, comprehension is destroyed. Think of a simple word like banana. If they emphasize the first syllable and say ba-nana, a native speaker genuinely might not understand them, even though the letters are identical.
Right. The rhythm dictates the meaning.
Exactly. It is a physical act. The rote repetition of "goodbye, Charlotte," "goodbye, Emily," builds vital muscle memory for the mouth, jaw, and tongue. English requires different muscular shapes than the learner's native tongue. And it also calibrates their ears. If they don't learn the rhythmic cadence of "nice to meet you," they won't recognize it when a native speaker slurs it together at full speed on the street.
That's a compelling argument regarding the physical realities of pronunciation, but have you considered the cognitive cost of that calibration?
What do you mean?
While they are busy perfecting the melody of the phrase, they are being taught to conceptualize human interaction in a way that is entirely artificial. Which brings us to the core structural philosophy of this material, the severe compartmentalization of social interaction.
Ah, you're referring to the division of the communication goals into isolated tasks.
Yes, the text artificially silos these behaviors. Page 1 is exclusively introduce yourself, where we have, "Hi, I'm Martin." Then, completely isolated in a later section, we have greet people, which introduces, "Hi, Len, how are you?"
Right.
But does this compartmentalization actually strip the humanity out of the language? Because in reality, these are not mutually exclusive modules. If you go to a networking event, you don't introduce yourself, pause, switch into a different mental subroutine, and then ask how someone is. Natural language merges them instantly. "Hi, I'm Ben. How's it going?"
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. That compartmentalization is not a flaw. It is a highly deliberate, scientifically sound feature designed to manage cognitive load.
You think merging a basic introduction and a greeting is too heavy a cognitive load?
For a true beginner, absolutely. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the learner again. Imagine you've just stepped off a plane in Tokyo. You don't know the alphabet, you don't know the sounds, and you are exhausted.
Sure.
If a native speaker approaches you and immediately throws you into the fluid, messy reality of a merged conversation, asking you to process a greeting, state your name, and formulate a response all at once, your brain simply crashes. The working memory of a human being can only hold about 3 to 4 new abstract items at a time.
So the text is actively defending against that crash.
Exactly. It's pedagogical triage. Notice the explicit checklists at the end of the section. By deliberately separating the vocabulary of glad to meet you from the vocabulary of how's everything, the text allows the learner to successfully acquire, practice, and neurologically consolidate one discrete competency before carrying the weight of the next. It prevents them from being overwhelmed. If we throw them into the deep end of natural merged conversation on day one, we aren't teaching them. We are just drowning them.
I understand the bottleneck of working memory, and I agree we cannot overwhelm the learner. However, my concern is what happens when we simplify and compartmentalize the language so much that we teach them a sanitized version of English that simply doesn't exist outside the textbook.
Sanitized.
Yeah. By imposing this strict division, we might be teaching A1 learners to treat these concepts as isolated silos forever. They learn to run the introduction code and then they stop and wait for a prompt. They deny themselves the fluid reality of how English is actually spoken because the curriculum didn't allow them to practice the messy intersections.
But the curriculum does give them the tools to navigate that. I completely disagree that it's sanitized. In fact, one of the things I find most impressive about this specific top-notch material is how it masks actual, immediate expressive range behind an illusion of simplicity.
Where are you seeing expressive range and hi, I'm Martin?
Look at how they teach responses to greetings. It doesn't just offer the stereotypical robotic, I'm fine. It actually equips A1 learners with a surprisingly realistic emotional spectrum right out of the gate. The material explicitly provides alternatives. Great, not bad, and so-so. Think about how empowering that is for a brand new speaker. They don't just have to be a smiling robot who is always fine. They are given the tools to express nuance. They can indicate that their day is actually just so-so. That provides an immediate emotional range, proving the material is not just a rigid, sanitized cage.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are pointing to a supplementary vocabulary box, but you have to look at how the material actually forces the student to practice.
Okay.
Yes, the text offers so-so with a little icon to indicate mediocrity on the side of the page, but look at the actual conversation model. The primary behavioral loop the text explicitly instructs them to listen and repeat and practice with the partner.
The core dialogue.
Right. The core dialogue immediately defaults back to the strictest, most traditional conformity. A, hi Lynn, how are you? B, fine thanks, and you? A, I'm fine. The text suggests a range of expression on the periphery, but the mechanism it actually models, reinforces, and asks students to drill into their muscle memory is a highly sanitized, polite binary. You are either fine or you are fine thanks.
But the tools to modify that dialogue are right there on the page. A teacher can easily instruct the students to substitute great or not bad into the model.
A good teacher might, yes. But the curriculum itself prioritizes the script of conformity, and there is a real sociolinguistic danger here. We are teaching A1 learners that English communication is primarily about fulfilling a polite transactional formula rather than actually expressing how you feel.
It's just a greeting, though.
But when a native speaker asks, "How's it going?" sometimes they genuinely want to know. If the learner's jaw muscles are hardwired by this text to instantly fire back, "Fine, thanks," and you, they aren't communicating. They are just batting a tennis ball back over the net without even looking to see where the other person is standing on the court. It is the illusion of expressive range masking a deeply constrained framework.
You know, you're right. It does sound robotic at first. I won't deny that. When you hear two A1 learners repeating, "Fine, thanks," and you, it sounds like a tennis match played by machines. But let's dive into the cognitive science of why batting that tennis ball back over the net is actually a brilliant biological hack.
A hack for what?
For bridging the conversational time gap. In a casual conversation, it takes a native speaker roughly 200 milliseconds to formulate a response to a question.
Wow, that fast?
200 milliseconds. That is faster than the human brain can even process the end of the other person's sentence. Native speakers are subconsciously predicting the end of the question and preloading their answer. But an A1 learner, their brain takes about 3 to 4 full seconds to parse the sounds, translate it to their native language, formulate a response, translate that back to English, and then speak.
And a 4-second pause in a standard greeting feels like an absolute eternity.
Exactly. It causes intense social friction. The native speaker gets uncomfortable, the A1 learner senses that discomfort, their affective filter spikes, cortisol floods in, and the conversation dies.
Right.
So, by teaching them to memorize fine, thanks, and you as a single unanalyzed sound block, what linguists call a lexical chunk, we allow them to bypass working memory entirely. They don't have to conjugate the verb to be or translate the concept of gratitude. They just press play on that specific chunk. It bridges that 200 millisecond gap. Having that preloaded response is exactly what frees up their cognitive bandwidth to actively listen to the rest of the conversation.
So they use the robotic phrase to buy time for their brain to process the real interaction?
Yes, if you don't have to think about how to say nice to meet you, you can spend your mental energy actually remembering the person's name. It's a survival skill. The fact that the model defaults to fine, thanks, and you is a feature, not a bug. It provides a socially acceptable, mathematically reliable formula that will work in 100% of basic social interactions.
Look, I see the utility in bypassing working memory to lower anxiety, but by delaying their creative expression, by telling them just use the preloaded formula for now to survive, you risk fossilizing that exact behavior.
Fossilizing in what sense?
In the sense that the temporary scaffolding becomes a permanent crutch. I have seen advanced B2 level speakers who have incredible vocabularies, but the moment someone initiates a basic greeting, they still freeze and default to fine, thanks, and you, because that specific rhythm was drilled into them so deeply at the A1 level that it permanently bypassed their critical thinking.
You think they unlearned how to listen?
Exactly. They unlearned how to actively listen to the greeting. If someone walks up to them and says, hey, how's it hanging? Or what's the good word? Their brain expects the standard input, doesn't get it. But their jaw muscles still fire back, fine, thanks, and you, because the response was preloaded.
But again, the material addresses the variations of input. Look at the greetings and responses table. It explicitly pairs nice to meet you with glad to meet you and it's a pleasure to meet you. It provides the diverse data points so they aren't caught off guard.
It lists them as equal interchangeable data points to be memorized, yes, but handing someone a phrase book of interchangeable chunks is not the same as teaching them how to build a language. It treats English like a vending machine. Put in greeting A, dispense response B. It doesn't explore how language actually functions contextually or how power dynamics, intimacy, or setting alter those greetings. We are sacrificing long-term communicative agility for short-term classroom success.
Well, I'd argue that handing someone a phrase book is exactly what you must do when they are standing in the dark trying to find the light switch in a completely new language. We can't expect them to understand sociolinguistic power dynamics when they are still trying to figure out how to pronounce the letter R.
Which perfectly encapsulates the core of our disagreement today.
It really does. When we look deeply at the mechanics of this top-notch material, my stance remains that a rigid, goal-oriented structure is the most effective and humane scaffolding for true beginners. By breaking English down into explicit, bite-sized goals, introduce, greet, goodbye, and providing the strict musical formulas to achieve them, this material gives the A1 learner exactly what their brain needs: immediate utility, reduced cognitive overload, and the psychological safety to open their mouths and speak without fear. It gives them the Allen wrench and the pre-cut wood so they can build a chair today.
And while I absolutely acknowledge the physiological and psychological need for safety at the A1 level, my position is that we must remain highly critical of how that structure is applied. An over-reliance on fixed scripts, compartmentalized social silos, and rote intonation drills might create the appearance of early fluency, but it risks leaving the learner trapped in a closed behavioral loop.
The permanent crutch.
Right. It trains them to recite English rather than to speak it. If we aren't careful, that temporary steel cage of rebar hardens,
and hinders the genuine communicative agility they will desperately need as they advance to higher levels of the language.
Regardless of where we land on that spectrum, I think we both clearly see that this source material provides a fascinating, highly engineered window into how foundational communication is systematically deconstructed for non-native speakers. Every box, every checklist, every assigned rhythm is a deliberate pedagogical choice rooted in cognitive science.
Oh, absolutely. It is a masterful piece of curriculum design, whether you agree with its underlying philosophy or not. It forces us to ask what it really means to know a language. Is it the ability to flawlessly execute a social ritual in 200 milliseconds? Or the ability to authentically express a messy human thought?
Every curriculum designer has to navigate. We invite you, our listeners, to think about the A1 materials in your own lives. Imagine yourself stepping off that plane in a foreign country. Consider how your brain would process those first critical interactions and form your own conclusions about the ideal balance between rigid structure and spontaneity.